Test, test. Okay. I just want to point out to you that that this is an amazingly relevant article if you were here last time. It's on, and because the notion of BRICS, which won't be brought up too much, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, it won't be brought up much in the remainder of Chomsky, as far as I know. And so this is an analysis of BRICS in light of the recent parliamentary coup, they're calling it. Not a military coup, but a parliamentary coup, where the reactionaries or the conservatives in the Brazilian parliament impeached the president, who was a leftist, a socialist. And the rightist oligarchs in the parliament impeached her. And so this is not generals coming in typical Latin American form, where the military comes in to seize power from socialists in order to give it back to the oligarchs. These are elected oligarchs doing it. And again, going back to last class, what does that do to Russia and China and India and South Africa when they lose Brazil, the biggest country, most populous and resource-rich country as part of their bloc in Latin America? What happens when they lose Brazil as a counterbalance to neoliberal imperialism of the United States? So this article is a very, very informative thing, and it's worth a read. It's like, I'm not a big expert on BRICS, but reading it I was like, okay, this is very interesting, because they're saying that actually BRICS is not anti-imperialist. They're actually cooperating with the neoliberal economic system. And so they're really not opposing Western neoliberalism. They're actually cooperating with it. Despite their anti-imperial rhetoric, they're actually part of the neoliberal thing more than they care to admit, and that sort of thing. So I don't know, it's all part of, BRICS is huge. It's like the anti, or the, you know what I'm saying. Okay, so, well, let's see. Stop. Oh, God. Go away, Ben Song. Yeah, okay, so let's go on to, and I haven't had time to reread the Eastern Europe one, so we'll just go through it together and see what comes out. So, Eureka, why don't we start with you?
The challenges today, Eastern Europe. Turning to the second region, Eastern Europe, there's a crisis brewing at the Nato Russian border. It is no small matter. In this illuminating and judicious scholarly study of the region, formerly Ukraine, crisis in the borderlands, Richard Sokwa writes all too plausibly that the Russian-Georgian War of August 2008 was in effect the first of the war to stop NATO enlargement. The Ukraine crisis of 2014 is the second. It is not clear whether humanity will survive the third.
Would survive. Let's go on down to the next paragraph and see where we've got a unit to stop and discuss. Arjun, go ahead.
From the West.
The West.
Okay. The West sees NATO enlargement as benign. Not surprisingly, Russia, along with much of the global South, has a different opinion.
By the global South, who do we mean?
The less developed.
Let's name the major global South. Who are our globally southern powers? Brazil, India, South Africa, right?
Yeah.
And so again, BRICS, right? That is our counterbalance as such. And so, not surprisingly, Russia, along with along with Russia, right? Along with much of the global south, has a different opinion. Go ahead.
As do some prominent Western voices. George Kennan warned early on that NATO enlargement is a, quote, tragic mistake, and he was joined by senior American statesmen in an open letter to the White House describing it as a, quote, policy error of historic proportions.
Okay, so who's George Kennan? Anybody? And Arjun, don't be a spoiler. Does anybody else know who George Kennan is? Oh, you don't know either, Arjun? Okay. George Kennan, he was the first generation CIA, like under Truman and such. So he was like the architect of American foreign policy in the Cold War. Containment of the Soviet Union, containment of China, domino theory, all that sort of stuff. That was Kennan. So, and look at Kennan now. He's still alive, and he's going, at least in the, the Russo-Georgian War? Well, no. Okay, so notice, what is he saying is a quote, policy error of historic proportions and a tragic mistake? What's at issue here?
NATO's enlargement.
NATO's enlargement. Now, so what do we mean by NATO's enlargement?
It's expanded into like the former Warsaw Pact countries like Poland.
Right, you remember, right? Cold War, it was NATO versus the Warsaw Pact, the Eastern European military alliance with the Soviet Union. Well, when the Soviet Union fell, so did the Warsaw Pact. And that leaves Eastern Europe with a choice. The newly independent Eastern European states, Poland and so forth, with a choice. Do we join NATO? Because and how is Russia going to feel if Eastern European countries are invited into NATO? How is Russia going to feel?
A little threatened.
A little threatened?
They're on their border now, basically. So
NATO's on our border, right? And this is what Kennan is saying. He's like, oh, Jesus Christ, what are you doing? Why would you like push your military alliance to Russia's border, right? This is tragic and historical. All right, so Renee.
The present crisis has its origins in 1991 with the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union. There were then two contrasting visions of the security system and the political economy in Eurasia. In Sakwa's words, one vision was a quote, wider Europe, with the EU at its heart, but increasingly coterminous with the Euro-Atlantic security and political community.
Stop. Let's get our heads around that. So what's option one? What does coterminous mean? Co means together. Terminus.
isn't that like a road or like a route?
Huh?
Isn't it?
I'm picturing just sort of like they meet, sort of like
I was
this.
gonna say a terminus. I thought it was like a road or a route into something.
That's
Having the same boundaries for extent.
yeah. Okay, so what are we saying here then? The first vision is what? Go ahead and discuss that. I'm sure you get it.
Alright. Coterminous is, working together with, being part of.
What is this? What is this vision of a wider Europe? That's option one. Vision one.
Well,
Like US border,
more
like
united.
borders a whole Europe.
Yeah, it's
Eastern
it's like a
Europe.
federal Europe,
Yeah.
essentially, or to an extent, it's federal Europe.
Here's what I'm seeing. Tell me if you agree. One vision was of a wider Europe with the EU at its heart. So that's the European Union at its heart, but increasingly coterminous with what's the key word there? With what? What's the key word? Atlantic, because that means what? The United States, right? So that means that we're picturing Europe and the United States, Eastern Europe and the United States. What's the other vision, by contrast?
Eastern.
So Renee, go ahead.
And on the other side, there was the idea of Greater Europe, a vision of a continental Europe, stretching from Lisbon to
Vladivostok.
that has multiple centers, including Brussels, Moscow, and Ankara, but with a common purpose in overcoming the divisions that have traditionally plagued the continent.
Do you see that? Discuss the difference between. Go ahead and just talk it out and sort of like.
Western Europe versus
Yeah.
Where's Vladivostok? That's the important thing. Where's Vladivostok? Do you know?
No idea.
It's
I
Pacific
assume
Russia.
on
It
the
is
other
Russia's.
side of Russia.
It's Russia's Pacific port north of China, right?
Yeah.
North of Manchuria. Russia has a port north of Manchuria in Siberia, right? And so this is the, what's it called? Wider Europe. What's excluded from wider Europe?
Vladivostok.
No, Vladivostok's in. No, wider Europe.
Yeah.
Europe is now. It's like let's make Europe Siberia. Let's make Europe all the way to the Pacific. That's the vision.
So what is excluded from?
What's excluded from it? No, Western Europe's there.
This-
The United States. So for
Lisbon is Portugal.
Oh,
the United
US.
States.
The U.S.
Oh. From a wire. Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The world at a crossroads. The Cold War's over. How do we realign? Like AP World's got really great thematic sort of like labels, right? Realignments. So how do we realign now? Is Europe going to pursue a greater Europe?
So it seems like the second one is more based on like geography versus the first one is more based on their ideologies, like the neoliberalism in the first one, including the U.S., and the second one, although they're different, is mostly just for the continental Europe.
Yeah.
Which one seems more? Well, what are they? What? I agree with you, but also the continental Europe stretching from Lisbon, Portugal, to Vladivostok, Pacific coast, Siberia, that has multiple centers, including Brussels. Where's Brussels? Belgium.
Belgium.
That's where the European Union's headquarters is. Moscow, Russia, and Ankara. Where's Ankara? That's Turkey.
oh yeah, yeah.
That's Turkey's capital. And what's the common purpose?
It's unifying.
Overcome the divisions that have traditionally like
And by the continent now, what do we mean? I like that. That's very interesting.
Europe and
Siberia.
I don't think so. I think Eurasia,
Eurasia is right.
right? Because notice, Europe is not a continent. That's the weirdest geographic concept ever. Europe
Yeah.
is not a continent.
Yeah.
It's not floating like Australia. It's connected to Eurasia, right? And so we're finally like, well, this wing was going towards that vision. Let's look at the world wars. Look at the Ottoman Empire versus Europe. Look at Russia versus the West in the Cold War, that sort of thing. So, okay, so now the Cold War's over. So here it is, 1991 to the present. Adam, go ahead.
Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev was the major component of Greater Europe, a concept that also had European roots in Gaullism and other initiatives. However, as Russia collapsed under the devastating market reforms of the 1990s, the vision faded, only to be renewed as Russia began to recover and seek a place on the world stage under Vladimir Putin, who, along with his associate Dmitry
Medvedev.
has repeatedly called for the geopolitical unification of all of Greater Europe, from Lisbon to Vladivostok, to create a genuine strategic partnership.
What do you need clarification on? There are a few concepts there. They're just, like specific factual knowledge that you might not have, like Gaullism, for example.
What is Gaullism?
What is Gaullism? Yeah, it's from Charles de Gaulle, the general of France during World War II, and after World War II, de Gaulle became president of France.
Yeah.
And Gaullism was his defiance of U.S. hegemony. He was a French nationalist. And so he resisted U.S. domination, and in fact, I think even at a certain time withdrew from NATO.
France was out of NATO for like several years, I think.
Yeah, and so that's Gaullism, right? A European center, not an American dominance. And so, so Gorbachev was a proponent of Greater Europe. What are our two names here again? Wider Europe versus Greater Europe. Wider Europe, that's U.S., Atlantic. Greater Europe, that's Eurasia. And so Gorbachev, of course, wants Greater Europe. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. But then what happened?
Didn't do so well in history boards.
Now again, we talked about when the Soviet Union fell, what happened to their economy. Do you remember that?
It kind of
was
went to shit.
controlled by
All those
the ex-Soviet
acts.
like
Yeah,
officials.
and it was neoliberal shock therapy. It was literally called shock therapy. The chairman of the Federal Reserve, I think his name was Volcker at this time, in the U.S., designed and advised Yeltsin on how to make the transition out of communism and turn to a market economy. And he said, dude, it's going to be shock therapy. It's going to hurt. And it sure as hell did. It turned into this oligarchic crony capitalism and all sort of stuff. And so Russia was very weak. Their inflation skyrocketed. Everybody was miserable, all sorts of stuff throughout the 90s. But then, and so Russia had no power to push for this wider Europe concept because they were in crisis, making this transition. Until then, what's our next stage? I'm just clarifying this. What's our next stage? Russia's in crisis isn't until Putin becomes Russia's president or prime minister, depending on which year. He's gone back and forth, hasn't he?
Yeah.
They have a dual leadership system.
I think I've read somewhere that Putin, like, he doesn't eliminate the corruption in Russia, he just co-opts them into his circle so that way he knows they serve the state as opposed to just themselves.
And he's certainly, I'm not a huge expert on him, but he is certainly too strong to, he has certainly strengthened Russia, right? So Russia is no longer so weak that it can't resist anything. And then here we are today, Putin versus Obama, Putin versus, right? So Putin came along since maybe 2000 and has been calling for the Greater Europe thing. All right, so Ryan.
These initiatives were, quote, greeted with polite contempt, Sokol writes, regarded as, quote, little more than a cover for the establishment of a greater Russia by stealth, and an effort to, quote, drive a wedge between North America and Western Europe. Such concerns trace back to earlier Cold War fears that Europe might become a, quote, third force, independent of both the great and minor superpowers, and moving towards closer links to the latter, as can be seen in Willy Brandt's Ostpolitik and other initiatives.
Okay. Forget the parenthetical. Willy Brandt was just an East German president, and Ost means east in both German and Russian. So Eastern politics. So let's pull out. What's the big idea here? Who greeted these initiatives with polite contempt? Who do you think? It doesn't specify.
The West.
Huh?
The West.
And by the West you mean?
The United States.
Because notice the West is now like, well, we got Europe and we got America, and now like Europe is in question. So, and what was the contempt again? So how is this greater Europe? Or, damn it, I need to get this. Yeah, greater Europe. So how is this greater Europe being framed by its critics?
As
That's
Russia
that
was
was
expanding.
greater Russia.
Right. And so they're just accusing Russia of like having these big geopolitical power plays by stealth. And the worst case scenario, it would drive a wedge between America and Western Europe. And as Chomsky's just, so this guy seems like an interesting scholar, Sakwa, I don't know who he is. Okay, so clear enough, right? Can we go on? So the U.S. is basically saying, look, they're just trying to like divide and conquer, make Europe, drive a wedge between Europe and the United States. Okay, so Alice. Oh, I'm sorry, Ryan, have you gone?
I just want to.
You just went, okay, Alice.
The Western response to Russia's collapse was triumphalist. It was hailed as signaling, quote, the end of history, the final victory of Western capitalist democracy, almost as if Russia were being instructed to revert to its pre-World War I status as a virtual economic colony of the West. NATO enlargement began at once, in violation of verbal assurances to Gorbachev that NATO forces would not move, quote, 1 inch to the east, quote, end quote, after he agreed that a unified Germany could become a NATO member, a remarkable concession in the light of history. That discussion kept to East Germany. The possibility that NATO might expand beyond Germany was not discussed with Gorbachev, even if privately considered.
Okay, a lot of detail there. What's the main idea? Discuss amongst yourselves. What's the main idea here? Discuss amongst yourselves.
End of history, isn't that Fukuyama?
Yeah, that's Fukuyama. Fukuyama. And triumphalism, right? I mean, I gave you those exact words and notice. And so, you know, here's the hub. What did the West assure Gorbachev?
They would expand
east.
After Gorbachev agreed that a unified Germany, remember there was East and West Germany, right? So we got to put Germany back together. After Gorbachev agreed that that Germany should become a NATO member, or could become. So Gorbachev's like, yeah, okay, we'll let Germany join NATO, Eastern Germany. We'll let them join NATO. This is a little bit unclear to me. I don't quite get. Do you? Do you get the details of this? Because that discussion that Germany could become a NATO member kept to East Germany. And it included, we won't move 1 inch to the east. The possibility that NATO might expand beyond Germany was not discussed with Gorbachev. Does anybody else have a hard time understanding what the point of this is?
So at the realm of possibility that NATO would expand past Germany.
They didn't actually tell Gorbachev they would.
And that they,
Well, if they promise not to go 1 inch further east,
if they go east,
then that seems to be talking about like. Are they saying that we won't like put NATO bases in East Germany? Germany will become a member of NATO? I think that's it. I think maybe during the Cold War,
West Germany was definitely part
West
of
Germany was part of NATO.
it. And if Germany unified, then I mean,
Then we got to ask, okay, so is Germany or is it not part of NATO?
yeah.
And I guess they said it'll be part of NATO, but we won't move 1 inch east into the former East Germany.
yeah.
Does that make sense? I think that makes sense. And so now it makes sense that what they never discussed was, but will you move east of East Germany?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. And this is all like 1991, 92. Right? Okay, so are we back to Eureka?
Soon NATO did begin to move beyond, right to the borders of Russia. The general mission of NATO was officially changed to the mandate to protect crucial infrastructure of the global energy system, sea lanes and pipelines, giving it a global area of operations. Furthermore, under a crucial Western revision of the now widely heralded doctrine of responsibility to protect, sharply different from the official UN version, NATO may now also serve as an intervention force under US command.
There are the key ideas. What changed?
They went bigger. They expanded their operations to global scale.
So they went to the borders of Russia, and he'll go into that geographic expansion in a minute, state building expansion and conflict. But notice the mission of NATO itself. NATO was a defense alliance. You attack one member and everybody else will come to that member's defense. So this was defense, this was military. And suddenly we've changed the mission. We have changed the entire purpose of NATO. And this is to what? Do you see how incredibly, incredibly radical this change to a mandate to protect crucial infrastructure of the global energy system? So now NATO can, like, anywhere in the world that an oil pipeline or sea lanes or anything, NATO can become a world expeditionary force, kind of like the UN in Korea, right? In the Korean War, the UN went to the Korean War to, like, yada yada, right? So NATO, under American leadership, now seems to be not just defending NATO members' territory. Furthermore, revision of the now widely heralded doctrine of responsibility to protect.
How's it sharply different from the official UN version?
Let's see if they go into it here. What I suspect he's talking about, and only because I don't know the deep history of this, but responsibility to protect. The United Nations, what was the principle of the United Nations all along in terms of like invading other countries?
Resolving conflicts.
No aggressive.
Only if they were aggressive, right? Because what principle is inviolate? Sovereignty, right? So a state's sovereign domestic affairs are of no business to the United Nations. You cannot interfere with our sovereign affairs. That's Treaty of Westphalia, right? We're going all the way back to that, right? You can't invade us because you don't like what we're doing in our country. That has always been the UN principle. And suddenly responsibility to protect, and this is something we didn't talk about a lot, human rights, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the United Nations, that was like actually passed in 1949, 48, 49, right after World War II, and the Holocaust and all that sort of thing. But you know what? Nobody talked about it for the 50s, for the 60s, for the 70s. It was Cold War and it was war, and it was proxy war and all that sort of stuff, right? It was communism versus capitalism, it was economic. And the US, and this is deeply interesting and deeply documented and studied in all sorts of really interesting histories. The US made a very, very smart move from we are defending capitalism and liberal democracy to we are defending human rights. And suddenly we started criticizing countries for violating human rights and freedom and dictatorship and all that sort of stuff. And so that's a moral, that's a much more moral type of rhetoric to appeal to your audience, giving you a better ethos. And so that's what the responsibility to protect is now morphing into. We have the responsibility to protect people and, I don't know, let's see. Where are some dictatorships that we invaded because we're protecting people from their evil dictator?
Cuba.
Oh, no, since the 90s.
Iraq.
Saddam Hussein in Iraq. In Libya, Muammar Gaddafi. These were heads of state who were overthrown and killed by the United States, sometimes with NATO. In Libya, it was NATO. NATO cooperated in the overthrow of Gaddafi in Libya, and he was like murdered and anally raped with a rifle or a broomstick or something in the streets of Libya. This man who had like kept
By
Libya
rebels, though, or
by
Yeah.
U.S.-backed rebels,
US-backed.
right? And on and on and on. And so this is what's going on now. Now again, I will just tell you, when humanitarian crises break out in Syria, for example, Assad is gassing his people. Well, I am now skeptical enough of what I read in the news to go, is he really? I'm skeptical about what I read in the news. Oh, he gassed his own people. I'll show you something. You want to see it?
See what?
Trust me, it's worth seeing. What I want to show you. In terms of my skepticism about what we're hearing about Assad in Syria. Justifying our responsibility to protect Syrians from their evil dictator who gasses them. Oh, he's gassing his own people. We have to protect them. Let's invade Syria and overthrow its government.
Post a lot.
I do. It's because I'm okay, here it is.
When US Marines.
The United States is in a perpetual state of war because the bankers control the politicians and they read the script as given to them by the banksters and they make huge amounts of money off of this. What this gentleman is saying about the United States not wanting war, not wanting to get involved is like Iraq 2.0. It's a repeat of the same rubbish that was said, oh, we don't want war, war is a last resort. That's absolutely untrue. It's a lie.
He's a Marine. He's a U.S. Marine.
Those that are in government are nothing more than prostitutes who are carrying out the orders of those who are in charge of them, and those that are in charge want another war. And part of that is what we discussed earlier, the Greater Israel Project, to destabilize any Arab regime which might have any kind of autonomy and self-determination. Any regime in the Arab world that is not an absolute puppet cannot be tolerated. And who are the nations that we target? Those that are not puppets. We don't target those like the Saudi regime, which is the biggest human rights violator in that region. It's cutting off people's heads in public, cutting off hands. It is the most grotesque regime on the planet, and yet we give that regime weapons and it's no problem whatsoever. The duplicity and hypocrisy of the United States and the West can't even be measured. It is so enormous. And these mouthpieces, such as this gentleman in Washington, is only doing a disservice to himself and his country. And the fact is that American sons and daughters will get involved in this yet again, and these chicken hawks who are pretending to care about the Syrian people are going to be sacrificing not their own sons and daughters. I would like this man to send his sons and daughters and his grandchildren off to Syria when this turns into a greater conflict, because this is what we're flirting with, is a world war, a third world war. This is not a joke. We are flirting with a third world war on the basis that apparently we care so much about the Syrian people, just like we care so much about the Iraqi people and the Afghani people. The only people that buy this sort of stuff are either bought-off prostitutes or the dumbest of the dumb. And we're also led to believe that Assad is the dumbest idiot dictator on the planet.
This is what I'm showing it to you for, this particular point. Because I was saying I'm not sure that I believe what I hear about Assad. Notice this is our responsibility to protect. That's what he's criticizing.
Or the dumbest of the dumb. And we're also led to believe that Assad is the dumbest idiot dictator on the planet now, isn't he? Because he invited UN inspectors to come in, and he brought them in. On the very day that they come in, he decides to attack his own people 10 miles away from where the inspectors arrive. This is beyond ridiculous, and the only people that buy this, again, are bought-off prostitutes or the dumbest of the dumb.
Damn. Angry man.
You fight in the Middle East and see your friends' legs blown off and then bleeding and dying due to IEDs and explosives and such for several deployments, and don't get angry. I've got friends, Arabic linguists, who have been multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan.
An ex-SEAL Team 6 member came to talk to my PE class last semester, and someone cracked him the question, like, did you believe in what you were doing in Afghanistan? However, he was like, partook in like 4 tours, and he said no. He flat out said no, and he's a huge patriot, but he said no, definitely not.
Yeah, that's
He
just
criticized all of the U.S.'s foreign policy and things like that.
Yeah, to call people unpatriotic for criticizing the government instead of being on the side of justice and the people is one of the dirtiest tricks in the book. This guy's a patriot. He's trying to save people's sons from being killed for bogus reasons. But yeah, so but you heard his argument. Anger aside, you heard his argument. Really, Assad would invite UN inspectors to come in and show that he's not doing this, and on the very day they arrive, he would just kill innocent civilians on that day? What an idiotic thing to actually tell the people to believe so that we can try to overthrow him, right? It makes no sense. He's not stupid, right? So, responsibility to protect. This is all related, right? Okay, much more. We're almost done. Okay, so who's up? Arjun, go.
Of particular concern to Russia are plans to expand NATO to Ukraine. These plans were articulated explicitly at the Bucharest NATO summit of April 2008, when Georgia and Ukraine were promised eventual membership in NATO. The wording was unambiguous. quote, NATO welcomes Ukraine's and Georgia's Euro-Atlantic aspirations for membership in NATO. We agreed today that these countries will become members of NATO. With the, quote, Orange Revolution, victory of pro-Western candidates in 2004, State Department Representative Daniel Freed rushed there and, quote, emphasized U.S. support for Ukraine's NATO and Euro-Atlantic aspirations, as a WikiLeaks report revealed.
Okay. What just happened here? Russia's concern are the expansion of NATO to Ukraine. Can you picture Ukraine on the map? Is a map helpful?
Yes, it's on the border. They're drawing clouds on the map.
This is a better map because this shows us where Georgia is too. Suddenly these little bitty states that nobody cares about, including me, right? I mean, just because, like Georgia, where the hell's Georgia? Like we don't think about Georgia, but geopolitically, let's think about Georgia, because notice that Georgia came up in this, right?
Where's Georgia?
Where's Georgia? Between the Caspian and the Black, right there,
Yeah.
right south of Russia. So right on Russia's borders. Turkey is a NATO member, and oh hell, now it's just like crawling on up. And there's Ukraine. Now, where's Moscow? And the Crimea is right here. This little peninsula, that's the Crimean Peninsula. And notice it's on the Black Sea, and this is where there are a lot of Russians in Ukraine. So there are Ukrainians and there are Russians, right? And they've been multi-ethnic for a long time. And so when Ukraine's democratically elected government was overthrown by a color revolution, people filling the streets, what does this sound like? People filling the streets and demanding the overthrow of a democratically elected government, and the people wanting and the West cheering them on? What is this? Can you take it back historically so that you can go, oh wow, this is actually a long-term pattern? Iran. Mossadegh 53, right? 1953, the Iranian overthrow of Mossadegh, with the CIA actually taking suitcases of money to thugs who fill the streets with signs, and we film it and we put it on the news and we say, look at the people, the popular uprising against Mohammad Mossadegh, because he's nationalizing British petroleums, BP's, oil fields, right? And so we put the Shah in. These are color revolutions. There is a handbook written by a guy, what's his name? I can give you all his documentation. There are a couple of people who have actually written books on how to do a color revolution. When I look at Hong Kong and the Umbrella Movement, when I look at Tiananmen Square and the Lady of Liberty, right, the Statue of Liberty that they built, all these iconic things. And now color, orange revolution, green revolution, jasmine revolution, all these things, right? They brand them. And so they just become like branded big things, and suddenly everybody on Facebook is like, oh, the umbrella, right? And that's that type of stuff. So this orange revolution in Ukraine is, oh no, orange was Georgia? Arjun, you don't know?
I don't know much.
Okay, all right, well let's go back and let's get on through this. Okay, so, concern to Russia. NATO's expansion to Ukraine. There's a NATO summit in 2008. Georgia and Ukraine are promised membership. 1991, we promised we won't go east with NATO. 2008, let's go east with NATO to Georgia and Ukraine. On the record, unambiguous. And the U.S. State Department supports the Orange Revolution. John Mearsheimer is a leading U.S. establishment international relations scholar. So notice Chomsky is not being a radical here. He's saying, look, mainstream American international relations scholars. So who's up? Adam.
Russia's concerns are easily understandable. They are outlined by international relations scholar John Mearsheimer in the leading U.S. establishment journal, Foreign Affairs. He writes that the taproot of current crisis over Ukraine is NATO expansion and Washington's commitment to move Ukraine out of Moscow's orbit and integrate it into the West, which Putin viewed as a direct threat to Russia's core interests.
Keep going.
Who can blame him? Mearsheimer asks, pointing out that Washington may not like Moscow's position, but it should understand the logic behind it. That should not be too difficult. After all, as everyone knows, the United States does not tolerate distant great powers deploying military forces anywhere in the Western Hemisphere, much less on its borders.
Straightforward, right? I think last time we talked about the shoe on the other foot thing, just turn the tables, and it's a very interesting thing. The Chinese lake, the Caribbean is a Chinese lake. What did he just do here? And what's he referencing with this? The United States does not tolerate distant great powers deploying military forces anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. The Monroe Doctrine, right? So it's certainly not hard to understand Putin's resistance to this NATO expansion. Simply put, one would have to be a very, very, very unfair person to go, oh, how dare he oppose NATO expansion, or an aggressive person, dangerous Russians. Ryan.
In fact, the U.S. stand is far stronger. It does not tolerate what is officially called, quote, successful defiance of the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, which declared but could not yet implement U.S. control of the hemisphere. And a small country that carries out such successful defiance may be subjected to, quote, the terrors of the earth and a crushing embargo, as happened to Cuba. We need not ask how the United States would have reacted had the countries of Latin America joined the Warsaw Pact, with plans for Mexico and Canada to join as well. The merest hint of the first tentative steps in that direction would have been, quote, terminated with extreme prejudice, to adopt CIA lingo.
I'm laughing because this is Chomsky's dark humor. It's just so dry and dark. He quotes the CIA's own language, "We'll terminate them with extreme prejudice." And that's what we said, by the way, about Allende in Chile when he was elected. That's Henry Kissinger.
Extreme prejudice, I suppose.
Kissinger used that language with the CIA. Terminate with extreme prejudice. Bomb their White House and kill them. Right? And put in Salvador Allende, who rounded up tens of thousands of people who were protesting against this coup. The documentaries are shocking. The people who were Democrats in Chile, who were outraged at what had just happened, filled the streets, protested, were rounded up, put in a soccer stadium, and just mass slaughtered. Tens of thousands of people just gunned down by the government that we put in Chile. So that's terminated with extreme prejudice. And notice Chomsky doing it again, right? He's just shoe on the other foot thing. Picture the Warsaw Pact, saying, okay, Canada, Mexico, come on in, join the Russian alliance. Alice, why don't you close this one?
As in the case of China, one does not have to regard Putin's moves and motives favorably to understand the logic behind them, nor to grasp the importance of understanding that logic instead of issuing imprecations against it. As in the case of China, a great deal is at stake, reaching as far, literally, as questions of survival.
Imprecations. What's an imprecation? I love vocabulary.
Wow. Good to find. A spoken curse.
Curse that Putin. Russian aggression. How is a great deal at stake reaching as far literally as questions of survival? He just said literally, I'm not exaggerating here. Nuclear.
Threats.
And so now when we turn to the Islamic world, and I hope you come back, right? Because what do we have left? Now, and this, that's part 2. Look at Chomsky. That'll show the ragheads. Right? He's being ironic. We won't get through part 2. But to finish the Middle East, does he go into Syria here? Afghanistan.
GWOT is Global War on Terror, right?
GWT is Global War on Terror.
Was it awful? It was so boring. I wouldn't expect that from his writing.
Okay, so he goes into Afghanistan, and then he goes into Iraq. And then Libya. And then ISIS.
This was written just like 20 days ago, right? Or published.
Yeah, it's from
really
his.
recent.
Yeah. My Facebook feed is an incredible thing because I follow pages that are geopolitical and multi-perspectival. So I've got Latin America, I've got BRICS, I've got Russia, and I've got Chinese and all sorts of stuff. And so yeah, it's like it's amazing. That's why I get so addicted to Facebook, because my feed is just nothing but just like more hell.
Information.
Yeah, it's and here's my other. I actually did, and I'm gonna. Do you guys know what RSS is? Amazing. You don't know what RSS is? Do you know what a feed reader is? Let me. Okay, Feedly. I'm showing you Feedly. You want to make your own newspaper without social media? Politics. Democracy. Okay, so these are the ones that have new feeds: fairness and accuracy in reporting, fairness and accuracy in reporting. So they actually analyze the way the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, whatever, frame things, what they leave out, what they include, how they rhetoric it, all that sort of stuff, right? So it's media criticism. Democracy Now! Is a real news station, not commercial, and so there's no celebrity news or sports news or anything. It's just like, and they no commercials, so they have like 10, 15-minute conversations about one issue instead of 3 minutes with a bunch of like flashy banners going by and bullshit Wolf Blitzer stuff, right? Or Anderson Cooper and all that stuff.
Do you not like Anderson Cooper?
Oh, just CNN's a joke. It's a joke. It's owned by a conglomerate corporative thing, and so its interests are definitely. Dude, I used to work in radio. I used to work in news in Korea, and guess what? Whenever I wanted to report something, because I was the person that came in at 7 in the morning, looked at the news overnight, and selected the stories to include for the 9 o'clock broadcast. And I would have to pass it to my desk editor, and the desk editor would mark out with pen, don't do that, that'll anger the government. In the same way, notice that's political censorship. That's the state, because this was for Seoul City Hall. In the corporate media, it's not that you're worried about angering the government, it's that you're worried about angering the advertisers and the shareholders and the owner, the CEO, right? So why did Sanders get a complete media blackout for so long? Why did the Washington Post make 16 headline articles in like 6 hours before the New York primary, all slamming Sanders in 6 hours before, like the day before the primary? 16 different negative headlines on Sanders. And most of them, fair is like bullshit, not fair, inaccurate, all sorts of stuff, with evidence. Because the Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon.com, a corporation that has huge tax benefits from the current regime. And Sanders is saying, you know, we could actually like take our corporate tax rates back to the pre-Reagan era, and we would have bridges that aren't crumbling, and yada yada yada, right? They're ripping the people up, yada yada. So CNN is just part and parcel of that. But in any case, so how does this work? And you know, here's my China, so all my different China things. New York Review of Books, Project Censored. That's a really interesting website because they're like, this is what the media won't touch because it's just taboo to talk about this in the mainstream media. So let's talk about the stories that nobody talks about. Like half the things we've heard about just through Chomsky that you never see on the news. And then economics, I've got my economics reads there. And so look at that, just in the last 2 days, 6 articles from Beat the Press, Economist View, 12 articles, yada yada, right? And so how do I read my newspaper? If I go to economics,
You just click on an article.
yeah, and there's different views. So this is a free thing, Feedly. Right, and so there it is. Contrary to what you read in the Washington Post, financial transaction taxes will save most investors money, yada yada. So it gives, and I choose which feeds because, yada yada. And so how do you add content? Let's just find a website. Let's see. Oh hell, I'll pretend like I want to subscribe to CNN.com and get CNN. Let's see now. So, oh, they're just way too big. Okay, but you know what? Watch. So you take the URL and you go to your Feedly and you just go to your sidebar. Whoops. And it's easier. Add content. There it is. And you just click in the URL. You can search too, and they will give you things. So, okay, CNN.com, Asia, Middle East, Europe, Africa. Do I want all of them? I'll just do Asia. Add to Feedly. Put it wherever I want. I'll put it in China. And close. So there is the latest 10 articles. Again, I've got different views. I could do cards, yada yada. But I like this view, just because I read the headlines and I skim through. And there it is, bam, right? And you can actually read the entire, well, no, CNN makes you click through so you can see the ads. So here's how it looks, bam. You see the entire article right there in your feed. And that way you decide what you don't want to miss, yada yada. Feedly.com. Don't go home without it. All right. Are we gonna do them? Well, all right. I hope to see you next time.
Middle East.
Yeah.